That is how we make our way forward, by celebrating everyone else who's out there who's trying to do a little bit better today than they did yesterday.
Welcome to the Food Matters Podcast, your home for health and wellness. My name is James Colquhoun, filmmaker and founder of foodmatters.com, and I am your host on this journey to inner and outer transformation. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a short moment to talk to you about the Food Matters Nutrition Certification Program, because studying nutrition completely changed my life. It helped me to heal my father, get him off 6 different medications, lose 50 pounds, and completely regain and transform his life and health. But the problem is that we're not really taught about nutrition in our schooling system. The medical profession is rarely pronouncing the facts of using nutrition as medicine, and we have a fast food industry that thrives off misleading consumers. So if you're looking to learn about how to use nutrition as medicine to either heal yourself or a loved one or help prevent chronic disease, or you want to take that next step on your study and nutrition journey and become a certified nutrition coach, then the Food Matters Nutrition Certification Program is for you. This is a 10-week or self-paced, internationally accredited certification program designed to take you through some of the most important topics on the latest research when it comes to nutrition and natural healing, including gut healing, autoimmune conditions, balancing hormones naturally, detoxification, biochemical individual approaches to nutrition. Plus, it brings together the best that we know about nutrition science and anthropological research, and bringing these two approaches together to help you cut through the confusion about what to eat and what to avoid for optimum health. To find out more about the Nutrition Certification Program, plus to download your curriculum guide, head to foodmatters.com/study. You can pause this right now. It will only take you 30 seconds. That's foodmatters.com/study, or you can head to the show notes for more information. Have a beautiful day. Today we have an extra special guest for you. His name is Rich Roll, and this gentleman's transformation story is like none other you have ever heard before. He went from being addicted to fast food and on the couch to being one of the most respected ultra distance athletes in the world, and his story will have so many profound impacts for you from a perspective of food and also mindset. It's going to be a great chat. Rich, how are you?
I'm good, man. So excited to talk to you.
I know, same here. I want to take us back to the beginning of your transformation, and to me, I love your transformation because there's a common thread in a lot of transformation. It started with pain. Tell me about what it was like living that old life of yours, being that old you, and that wake-up call that you had to transform your life.
Yeah, pain is the ultimate motivator, is it not? Throughout my 30s, I was a corporate lawyer, doing my best to climb that ladder towards the American dream. And I think that I had spent the better part of my life chasing that American dream without ever really mindfully thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. And I'm a very persistent, diligent, hardworking individual. And I have a history of addiction and alcoholism. And I'd gotten sober at 31. And in the wake of that experience, having sort of decimated my life, I was very intent on rebuilding and repairing it and kind of getting back on track. And I threw all of those addictive tendencies into my profession. So I was working 60 to 80-hour weeks for many years, and I wasn't taking care of myself physically. I'd become a junk food addict. I was not exercising at all, despite the fact that I'd been a swimmer in college. And so by the time I was 39, I was 50 pounds overweight. I was never morbidly obese. I was just kind of like a chunky guy, a guy who looks like he's probably spending too much time riding elevators and working in an office. And it all caught up to me shortly before my 40th birthday. I think beyond kind of just being overweight and not treating myself very kindly, I was also very depressed. I was unenthusiastic about this path in life that I thought that I had chosen, but I feel like now in retrospect chose me more than I chose it. And so I was having there was a lot of confusion in my life about what I was doing. I was sort of in free fall, and that collided with the health scare late one evening as I was making my way up a simple flight of stairs where I literally had to pause. I was so winded. I could not complete just a simple flight of stairs without taking a break. And I had tightness in my chest and shortness of breath and sweat on my brow and really like fear in my heart that I was on the precipice of having a heart incident. Heart disease runs in my family. My grandfather, who also was a champion swimmer in his own right, had died at an early age of a heart attack. And my whole life, my mother would say, you got to watch what you eat and be careful, but it's kind of like blah, blah, blah when you're young. But it all became very crystal clear to me in that moment. Not only that I needed to change how I was living, how I was behaving, how I was prioritizing my time and my energy, but also that I wanted to make that change. I had a willingness to, take a leap of faith and try something different.
At that moment, was it clear to you that you had a pathway as to what to do next? It's not normally clear. I mean, how did you develop an idea about the next step to take when you had this motivator of pain?
Yeah, it's funny. When you look backwards in time from where I sit now, it all makes perfect sense and looks like those dominoes line up perfectly. But I can tell you, in the midst of that experience, it was all very confusing. There was no clear path. All I was doing was trying to make the next best decision and trying to learn along the way. I was clear that I needed to change my relationship with food. And so that was my first order of business. And the first thing that I did was a 7-day fruit and vegetable juice cleanse, which was crazy at the time. It was so out of left field from anything I'd ever experienced. I'd never gone a single day in my entire life without eating solid food. But I knew that that was something that would kind of shock me out of my habits. It didn't have to do with detoxing or any of that. I just needed to do something extreme to kind of reframe my relationship with food. And it was very effective in that regard. Over that 7-day period, I can remember lying on the couch, being listless and sweating and thinking, how am I going to make it through the day? But the remarkable thing is that at the end of that 1-week period, I felt completely revitalized. I had a resurgence of vitality and energy and mental clarity that I hadn't experienced since I was a young person, and it made it very clear to me just how potent the foods that we're taking into our body are, and the relationship to how we feel and how we behave and how we think and how we interact with others. And so that sort of catalyzed the interest and the intention to look a little bit more deeply into food. And that was certainly not a linear path for me whatsoever. I was kind of all over the map, trying different things, unsuccessfully for the most part, and played that out for 6 or 7 months before I finally decided that I was going to try a 100% plant-based diet, which was something that I was not excited about doing. It was kind of the last box to check before going back to eating cheeseburgers and saying I tried everything. And I didn't have high expectations that it would make me feel any different. I was in search of trying to feel like I did on that 7th day of that cleanse. Like, how can I eat on a daily basis that will allow me to have that sense of vitality? I was trying to recapture that. And what I discovered was that within a week or 10 days of adopting a 100% whole food plant-based diet, that I was able to recapture that feeling. I felt incredible. And that's when I knew I kind of haphazardly and imperfectly stumbled into something that was quite powerful for me. And at the time, this is before Forks Over Knives and before the Engine 2 diet. There was certainly plenty of resources available to me at the time, but there was not the awareness in a mainstream context that we have today.
Mm-hmm. When you first transitioned to this plant-based diet, were you eating a vegan junk food diet, or were you eating a real plant foods diet? I mean, you come off a 7-day cleanse, but yeah. I mean, I just know that so many people, when they transition, they're like, oh, I'm a vegan. And it's like, well, they're a junk food vegan. Right. And there's so many different takes on that. How was your experimentation with these different sort of delineations of plant-based diet, and how did you settle on being at the stage you're at now, or at that stage that prepared you to tackle some of these events that you got to?
It's never been easier to be a junk food vegan. And I think there's a lot of confusion where we conflate a vegan diet with health without really appropriately understanding the difference between what is a real healthful food and what is a junk food. And I had to learn that the hard way. In my sort of 6 or 7 month experimentation with a variety of different diets, I kind of had settled into a vegetarian diet, but my version of a vegetarian diet was Pizza Hut pizza without the pepperoni, Taco Bell, burritos, just keep the meat off it. A lot of like processed grains and, potato chips and things like that. And when I sort of, playing that out, there I was back on the couch, like, lazier than ever, more, dissatisfied than ever, feeling like I did, before that staircase episode. So I realized that's not going to work. So when I made the decision to go 100% plant-based, I did it without the junk food. So I made that leap from the get-go and cleared out like all of the processed foods from the mix. I wasn't like no oil or, super low fat or anything like that, but I basically eradicated, 99% of the culprit foods that would be categorized as vegan junk food. And that agreed with me and that works. It's interesting though, I've been doing this 11 years and now we see the rise and the advent of all of these amazing plant-based alternatives to many meat and dairy products. And there's a wide spectrum in terms of which of those are healthy and which of those would really fall under a junk food category. But it's very easy to delude yourself when you're at the market and you see these things and you go, oh, well, it's vegan. It must be good for you, right? It must be great. And I plead guilty to enjoying those foods from time to time. But my guiding principle, my North Star, is really plant-based foods as close to their natural state as possible.
So after this transformation, you're a lawyer, so you're typically sitting at your desk a lot. And then what was it that welled up inside of you that said, I want to do a triathlon, or I want to do or even have this idea of doing the Epic 5? I mean, these are not small feats. I mean, how did you build up this idea of wanting to do that?
Well, it was a couple things. I mean, first of all, it evolved over time. It wasn't like, oh, I went plant-based and the next day I thought I'm going to do Ultraman. It didn't quite happen like that. But I will say this. After adopting a plant-based diet, I did have this resurgence in vitality and I had all this energy for the first time in as long as I could remember. So the impulse to actually move myself physically occurred to me, which is something I hadn't felt in a while also. And so I started exercising again, first very casually. But I realized very quickly that I enjoyed that. And it was a big part of what I was about as a child and something that I loved very much and had really lost touch with it. So the first year was really connecting with that part of who I am that I had kind of repressed for the sake of like, well, now I'm an adult and adults don't do these things. So it was really nothing more than that. But I think what it evolved into was this pursuit of trying to unlock hidden potential. In a very short period of time, after changing my relationship with food, I had completely transformed. I lost 50 pounds. I looked different. I felt different. It was quite radical, and yet the changes that I made were relatively simple. And the thought occurred to me, if I could change this drastically, this dramatically in such a short period of time, what are the other areas of my life that I'm overlooking, where I'm sitting on top of mountains of potential that I'm just not consciously aware of? And that's what lured me into the world of triathlon initially and ultimately into ultra endurance athletics, because I think it's a beautiful, robust template to test human potential, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as well.
Yeah, it's a testing ground that very few people play with. And for you to be able to take that step to do that is remarkable. Tell me a little bit about what events sort of unfolded as you started practicing these triathlons and then leading up to basically the Epic 5, which is a pretty wild experience. Tell me about what sort of led up to that and then how you sort of convinced yourself that that was a fun idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a very nonlinear journey that had its ups and downs and many mistakes along the way. Like I mentioned, I was a swimmer in college, so I had that background. And I knew how to train and push myself. And as I sort of got fitter and more invested in this food adventure that I was on, I started getting more interested in fitness in general. And I had unfinished business as a competitive swimmer because alcoholism really derailed that career. And I never felt like I achieved my potential as an athlete. And so here I was at 40, 41 years old, having this kind of Renaissance experience and thinking, well, maybe I can be competitive again. Let's give this a go and see what I'm capable of. And I always was interested in triathlon. I'd never raced a bike. I'd never really done any running other than casual jogging here and there. And so I threw myself into it and I thought, how hard can it be? I know how to train as a swimmer. And I sort of just created this self-styled training program in this vacuum of my mind and went at it. And I remember I did a couple sprint triathlons that, I was the middle of the packer. There was no indication that I was going to be some kind of crazy ultra endurance athlete. And then I stepped it up to do a half Ironman distance triathlon. It was a wildflower race. I think this was 2007. And that was a disaster. Like I just got out of the swim. I threw up everywhere, got on my bike and tried to ride and everyone just whizzed past me and I couldn't keep pace with anybody. And when the bike ride was over, I cramped up so much I couldn't run and I just had to pull out of the race. So my point being that there was no indication that I was going to have this future as an athlete, but I just kept at it and I hired a coach and I got more and more interested and I got more and more scientific in my approach, not just to training, but to how the foods I was eating were playing into that equation as well, and set a course. I read this article about this crazy race, Ultraman. It was like a light switch went off in my mind and I thought, that's the race for me. It made no sense. It's not logical at all. My only experience in trying to do anything other than a sprint triathlon ended up in total failure. So I had no business really to responsibly entertain the prospect of trying something so difficult, but it kind of it defied rationality. It was more like this bizarre calling that I felt. Like it just felt right. Like I was like, when I read this article about this race Ultraman, which is a double Ironman distance triathlon that circumnavigates the entire big island of Hawaii over 3 days. It's 320 miles. It's absolutely bananas. I was like, that's what I'm doing. And I could see myself in my mind lining up at the start line. Like I knew it was going to happen. It was like a foregone conclusion, despite the fact that it made no sense whatsoever. And that's what happened. It's crazy.
So you did this ultra marathon and you placed quite well, I think. I think you were like 6th or 16th or something.
Well, my first Ultraman, I really just went, my goal, 2008 was my first Ultraman, and I had one goal, and that goal was don't die. I was like not trying to win anything, and I was very conservative in my approach and very conscious that I was a newcomer in this sport. But I ended up being, I think I was the second fastest American. I think I was 11th overall that year. And I, far exceeding my expectations and the expectations of everyone else involved in the event. So I thought, what would happen if I trained a whole year and went back to that race, like fully prepared with some experience? And so in 2009, that's what I did. And I was the fastest American that year and was 6th overall.
Wow. After that experience, is that when you decided, great, now I'm going to step it up and do this epic 5? I mean, every step seems like a crazy idea, even crazier than the one before it. I mean,
well, Ultraman was really driven by this quest that I was on, which was to determine the outer limits of my capabilities, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. What am I truly capable of if I really put it on the line and test myself? And I felt like that race, that Ultraman race in 2009, I walked away from that race feeling like I had answered that question for myself and that I didn't need to explore any further. And I would have been perfectly content to like hang it up and say, okay, on to the next thing. But what happened was my friend Jason Lester, who was a training partner of mine and a fellow competitor at Ultraman, a very inspiring individual who does these crazy races without the functional use of his right arm. He's a challenged athlete. And he's gone on to do amazing things. And it was his idea. He said, I have this idea for this crazy thing I want to do. I'm calling it Epic 5, and it involves doing 5 Ironman triathlons on 5 Hawaiian islands and completing it in 5 days. And so he solicited my participation in this thing. At first, I was like, I'm not doing that. I'll help you out, but like that exceeds, what I'm capable of, and like I'm good, But he sort of kept after me, and ultimately I realized that perhaps I had not answered that question for myself. Perhaps there was more work to be done and depths to be mined. And so I agreed to do it. In 2010, we set out to do this crazy thing that no one had ever attempted before, let alone completed. And we accomplished it. It took us a little bit longer than 5 days. We ran into all kinds of crazy obstacles and things that I talk about in my book. But ultimately, we were successful in completing 5 Ironmans on 5 Hawaiian islands. We did it in about 6.5 days.
It was just the two of you?
Just the two of us. We had, a ragtag crew of volunteers and people that were helping us out. So it wasn't just us in isolation, but we were the 2 people that actually did it. Yeah.
You would have had to have some crazy jokes or funny things you say to yourself to just crack you out of the seriousness of the level of what you were doing. I mean, how did you stay sane in some of those processes? Did you sing the Stevie Wonder song? Just the 2 of us.
There were more than a few trying moments, I can tell you. And the biggest factor was sleep deprivation, because we had to get off the island every day, and we would have to time these so that we would get on the airplane, the last flight off the island, to get to the next island and check into the hotel and all that kind of stuff. So ultimately, we were not getting very much sleep, and that really started to take its toll the 4th and 5th day. But the moments of levity were really Jason. Every time we'd hit an obstacle, Jason would say, that's why it's called a challenge. It's like, what did you think you were going to do? That like nothing was going to go wrong. Like our bikes broke. Like we met every conceivable obstacle along the way. And I definitely was, my emotions were tested to the limit, beyond the breaking point a couple times. Jason, I would say, I have to give him credit for being much more composed than I was throughout the adventure.
So when you reflect on your epic journey and all the things that you've achieved, and now the work that you're doing with the books and with your wife, how do you sort of relate these epic experiences and these ultra distance feats to somebody who might just be looking for where you were looking at for a stage, just to get off the couch? I mean, how do you make your story relatable for people?
I think that we are all of us, without exception, sitting on top of mountains of untapped human potential, just waiting to be unlocked and unleashed. And quite frankly, as Henry David Thoreau said so eloquently back in 1888 or whenever it was, I truly believe the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation, and what is considered resignation is confirmed desperation. I think it was true in his time. I think it's probably more true now. There are so many people who are dissatisfied with their lives. They're living their lives reactively, compulsively, and not mindfully or consciously. And it's really not even their own fault. Like, we are living all in this system that's set up to drive us onto career paths that we're not consciously choosing for ourselves, or that are out of alignment with who we truly are, our authentic blueprint. And I was lucky enough to wake up at 40 and embark upon this journey. And my responsibility with what I've experienced is to share the facts and the emotions of that experience with others, in hopes that I can help to activate and catalyze their version of what I've experienced. Of course, not everyone wants to be an ultra endurance athlete. It's not about that. Like Ultraman, Epic 5, these things that I've done, I consider them to be allegories or metaphors for that untapped human potential. And so my hope is that people can look at those experiences in my story and draw inspiration from that to then examine their own lives under a microscope to better identify what it is within them that has gone unaddressed, that spark, that little flame of passion that perhaps has been kindling in the soul, yet unaddressed for too long. And the work that I do, whether it's through the podcast or the books or the speaking, is to encourage people to pay attention to that little voice there and to bring expression to that in your own life. And in so doing, to perhaps connect with yourself more deeply and ultimately express a more authentic version of who you are, so that you can live more fulfilled and more purposeful and more content.
Wow, so you're not just about food.
No, but food's a big part of it. Food is a very important piece in this puzzle. It should not be overlooked, but it's not the only piece. For me, I look at food as the initial portal that brought me into a universe of personal growth and exploration. Had I not changed my relationship with food, I'd probably still be eating cheeseburgers at the law firm, right? And by changing the vibration of what I was putting in my body, it activated something in me that gave me a sense of self-care and a deeper connection with who I am that has then forged or encouraged this path forward. So I think everybody can have their version of that experience if you're more mindful about the choices you're making 3 times a day about what you're putting in your mouth.
Very well said. Very well said. In reflecting back on your journey in this transformation, you've centered it around food and then these sort of step-by-step, sort of haphazardly finding your way into doing an Epic 5 in a way. But when you reflect back on it, were there any specific mindset rituals or things that you did that you're like, wow, if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have probably added up to what it was? One thing you touched on, you said that you visualize being at the starting line. Mm-hmm. And I know that visualization is a big thing for a lot of athletes. You know, Carl Lewis used to do it. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger used to do it. Novak Djokovic built a trophy when he was 6 years old, and imagine winning Wimbledon and becoming number 1 in the world. And he did it on the same day, you know, some 15 years later. I mean, there's a lot to be said about it. Do you look back and consider there's a lot of sort of mindfulness visualization components to your journey that were important?
Yeah, absolutely, without question. Visualization, absolutely key. It's something I learned as a very young person in swimming, and it's something that I've practiced my entire life, and it's incredibly powerful. You know, time is a social construct, right? Time is not a universal fact, and I think when you deeply invest yourself in visualization practices to immerse yourself in the experience of what it's like to participate in whatever it is you're seeking to participate in or succeed at, what happens is you step into this knowingness, this sense that it has already occurred, that the work is done and your job is just to show up. And I think that allows you to then show up without the anxiety and the stress and the worry, and anchor yourself in the present. So visualization really for me is a pathway into mindfulness and presence, the ability to be truly in the moment of what you're doing without the idle chatter of the thinking mind that's talking you out of whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So visualization is key, but I think in order for the visualization to really take root and have the impact that you're seeking, you have to be an active, consistent meditator. Meditation is absolutely crucial. It allows you to gain the upper hand and the control over that thinking brain and that idle chatter, and allows you to be fully immersed in that present moment. And as an athlete, that's key. Like you can't enter that flow state that you hear about if you're entertaining thought. You have to be fully present in what you're doing. And what happens when you are consistently meditating is that you develop this acumen. It's like push-ups for the brain. And you then are the master of the brain rather than being its slave. So I think that's absolutely crucial. Some of the other practices that have been integral and really important for me have been journaling. I'm a big fan of The Artist's Way, which is a program created by Julia Cameron. There's an amazing book, and it's all about practices to help you connect with yourself and tap into your creative voice. But one of the key tools in that program is something called morning pages, which is essentially journaling in the morning every day, free form, without editing anything, to just kind of get out of yourself and onto the page whatever is happening in your conscious and unconscious mind. And what I found through many, many years of doing this, I've been doing it ever since I got sober, is that it really helps you crystallize your thoughts, and it helps you get very clear on what it is that you are trying to do so that you can organize your energy and your time and your resources around the accomplishment of that which is most key, most important to you.
Well, you didn't miss that point then, did you? You got it. When, back in the late 2008, 2009, after Food Matters had just come out, coincidentally, I was in the States traveling a bit, and I'd go to these festivals and people would be like, oh my God, how raw are you? How vegan are you? Like this and that. And everyone was sort of judging each other about their status of veganism or their status of raw foodism. And I think still we've got this legacy of nutritional dogma associated with labeling diets. How do you, being someone who's adopted a plant-based diet, how do you practice being a spiritual person and being non-judgmental, or not being a vegan police? And, there's a lot of vegan bashing that happens too. And how do you personally balance that? How do you approach that yourself? I mean,
with respect to my own relationship with food, or how I communicate with other people?
Both. I mean, a little bit of both, but mostly how you communicate to other people.
Labels are not our friends, and we are, we are animals that love our tribes, and nobody likes to be on a team more than a human being, and we can get very caught up in that to our detriment, I think. I think we can all agree that healthy eating is something we're all interested in. If anybody's watching this show, they're probably interested in that. But my perspective on it is to not get caught up in these, whether it's vegan, plant-based, raw, low carb, high fat, all these different labels, I think serve more to divide us than unite us. I'm very conscious and conscientious when I communicate to try to transcend the dogma associated with these various categories. And I think that what happens when we silo ourselves is that we set ourselves up for failure because we're trying to adhere to some perfectionist standard that none of us can possibly adhere to, because we're human beings and we're fallible by nature, right? So when somebody says, I'm going to be totally raw, or I'm going to be this or that, and then a couple weeks in or a year in or a month in, they slip up, people tend to flog themselves for that and throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, this is too hard, I can't possibly do this. Everyone else seems to have it figured out, but I don't. And then they give up and they retreat back to their unhealthy old eating habits. And that's not helping anybody. So what I think is we have to do the best that we can. None of us is living a zero impact lifestyle. If somebody's vegan, somebody else will say, yeah, but if you're eating vegan, do you realize how many rodents and bugs are churned up when they plow the field? It's like, yeah, I get it, right? We all have an impact that, we're trying to minimize here. The point is we do the best we can. It is an aspiration. We're all aspiring to be better. What is the next best choice that I can make? And let's leave it at that. And in terms of how I communicate with other people, my perspective is I'm always wanting to fan the flames of positive change. If somebody makes one step in the right direction, I think it's worth celebrating rather than chastising them because they're not doing it perfect or they overlook this other thing. Everybody's on their own journey, right? And if you discourage somebody by telling them, well, yeah, you kind of did that, but you also didn't do this, who's gaining by that? Only an insecure person will try to take someone down a peg because they didn't do it as well as some idealized version. So my perspective is always to fan the flames of positive change. No matter how small or incremental those steps are, that is how we make our way forward, by celebrating everyone else who's out there who's trying to do a little bit better today than they did yesterday.
Beautiful. I love it. Tell me about these extraordinary feats that you hit after this 40 years of age.
Went plant-based at age 40. At age 42, I did my first Ultraman, and I placed 11th overall. 2009, did my second Ultraman, placed 6th overall. 2010, I did Epic 5 Ironmans on 5 Hawaiian Islands in 6.5 days at age 43. This past year, I competed in the Otalo Swim Run World Championships in Sweden, which is a 10-hour ultra distance swim run competition where you traipse across like 50 islands spread wide across the Stockholm archipelago, and you do it as a team of 2. I did it with my coach. We were the fastest Americans. Can't remember what place we got. It took us like 10 hours. I did that at age 50. So I'm still getting after it. In 2012, my first book came out, Finding Ultra. It's my memoir that kind of tells my story. And that has gone on to sell quite a few copies. I've got a brand new version of that that's coming out this March. My wife and I wrote 2 cookbooks in the wake of that, the Plant Power Way and the Plant Power Way Italia, which is coming out in April. And in 2012, I launched the Rich Roll podcast, which now has over 30 million downloads and reaches people all over the world. They're long-form conversations with all kinds of inspiring people across all aspects of health, wellness, fitness, entrepreneurship, and the like. So it's been a crazy, wild ride. And it all started with changing my relationship with food, just like you.
I love it. That's perfect. Fantastic. Couldn't have been better. So where I want to finish with here is going to be interesting for you, and I think you've touched on it a little bit, is around how to create a sort of, in this process, you've created for yourself a greater sense of happiness and fulfillment and contentment than you had when you were in your 30s. And, I don't know that that's what you initially set out to do. You initially set out to just like get out of this haze that you're in. Reflecting on your experience, what is your sort of little formula that you've garnered for, for happiness and fulfillment? I mean,
here are the 5 steps to happiness and fulfillment, right? Yeah.
Like, how would you, do you think there's something to it? I mean, you found a passion, you found a calling, and you went after it. I mean, I don't know. How would you describe, and how would you help, if you had to lecture people about how to find happiness and fulfillment, what advice would you give them?
So the best advice that I can give to somebody who is searching for a greater purpose and fulfillment in their life is to ask them one question. And that question is, who are you? Like, who are you really? And resist the temptation to provide just a flip answer. This is my career. This is what I do. No, I'm talking about who are you really? What is unique about you? What is your specific, unique blueprint and design? What is it that you are here to express and create in your life? What is it about you that makes you uniquely you? What gets you out of bed in the morning, excited about your life? And I'm not suspecting that everybody's going to have an answer to that immediately, but I think exploration of that inquiry is the path forward to ultimately living a more purposeful, meaningful life. Because if you can identify that thing, and it could be as silly as, I like making paper mache birds, or I want to tell jokes on stage, or I want to learn how to play the guitar, or I always wanted to be an opera singer, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be some crazy big romantic thing. For me, it was simple as I just love jumping into a swimming pool in the morning, or I love the feeling of how the sun hits my shoulder on a trail run at dawn. Those were things I wanted to have more of in my life. Very simple, basic, ultimately quite primal instincts. And my path has been to just express that more in my life. And it's led me to all of these places. So it doesn't have to be that thing of like, well, I'm just going to quit my job, overnight. But I think the more you can invest yourself in that journey of trying to identify what it is that you are here to do, that is the path forward. And I think if you commit yourself fully to that, you will be amazed at what transpires over time.
Beautiful. Well answered, sir. Very well done. Final question here for you.
Yeah.
It's a big one. I'm not sure you're ready for it. So you're stepping out onto the stage and someone hands you a microphone and they're like, look, the whole world is listening. You've got 2 minutes. What lesson would you teach humanity?
Oh my God.
I mean, this is a big one. I mean, you've distilled a lot of your knowledge into so many different things, but what message would you have for humanity? It's a big deal.
My message to humanity is twofold. Take responsibility for your own life and give of yourself freely to others. If you can take control of your own path and then devote yourself in service to the betterment of other human beings, you will find more fulfillment, more purpose, more contentment, and more happiness than you can possibly imagine. And that will be your gift to humanity.
For everything that we've mentioned in today's episode, you can check out the show notes. There will be links and information there for you. And before I go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to invest in yourself and be here for this podcast. If there's anybody that you can think of who could benefit from this information, please make sure to share it with them. We believe in the power of life-changing information, and it's especially powerful when it's shared from a trusted source. And finally, if you could leave us a comment or make sure to subscribe to the podcast, we would greatly appreciate that. It helps us continue to bring you this life-changing information, and make sure that you get all future podcast updates sent to you. Have a beautiful day, and thank you once again.